Your destination is on the left.
And action. Sure.
Hey, what's happening, buddy? Corin. Nice to meet you, Lance. Really appreciate you coming by the campsite and having a little chat with us. Let us get to know you better. That's the crowd over there. Well, I mean, that's Chad. That's the Chad over there, but inside that box represents the crowd. So
Very good.
we're going to sit down and have a chat here in a minute.
Very good. Love it.
Cool. Thanks so much. Here's Corin. Our roll. Welcome to the campsite, sir.
Thank you.
I know it's a little weird. My name's Corin.
Corin, it's a pleasure. My name's Lance.
Lance. This is our Love America tour, trying to get to know people a little bit better and find out more about ourselves in the process.
It's great.
I think
love
so.
the idea.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thank you very much. It's been a struggle. Oddly enough, some people don't like the idea, but that's okay.
Those people are not to be trusted.
I agree 100%. I totally agree. I like to start things out by getting to know, the people on a normal way, like, where you're from and all that stuff. So I'll start out with, where were you born?
I was born in the rural Oklahoma community of Woodward. It's way up in the northwest part of Oklahoma. It's Great Plains, flat and windy. That's where I'm from.
Is that where you keep your hair short?
That's why I keep my hair short. All the trees up there grow one way, but there aren't very many of them. There's just a handful of trees.
Really?
It's Great Plains for sure.
And how big was the town you grew up in?
About 15,000 people.
That's not bad. Yeah, I interviewed a couple people yesterday who were from a town of like 1,400 or something insane like that, which is it's almost unfathomable.
Yeah. Right.
During what was what was the I don't like to ask everybody's age because sometimes people are a little sensitive about it, but what was the kind of the decade that you grew up in your youth from age 8 to 13-ish? Or?
I was a child of the 80s and graduated high school in the mid-90s, so that was sort of my time.
Gotcha.
My era.
And what was it like in that town during that time period? What was life like?
Well, it's a pretty conservative town. It's rural America, and I was pretty sheltered, I think, from a lot of urban ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very agricultural community. The only two industries out there really are agriculture and oil and gas. So one of those two things is what your family was probably involved in.
Right.
In some way or another. And another thing that was really interesting about my hometown, very, very few minorities. It was an overwhelmingly white community.
What was that? Was that a little strange? I mean, I guess when we're young children, we don't notice any difference.
No, you don't know any different until you go off to college somewhere. But it was very unique. I was thinking the other day, I never had an African American friend. I never had an African American in my high school all the way through K through 12. I never had a classmate. Single classmate that was a minority of any kind, really.
Yeah, I wonder if it's strange. I think that it's that those type of places probably don't exist very much anymore anywhere.
I don't think so.
Which is what it is. But when you transferred out of that, out of there, and you went off to college, we'll go back into the youth part in a moment. But I am curious, touching on that, going from high school into college, what was the experience like of like, where did you end up going to college from there?
Okay, so I grew up in a family that faith was really important to us, and so strong people of faith, Christian people, and those are some of the values that I picked up, and from a very young age, I mean, I felt a strong compulsion. I wanted to help people, and I wanted to do something something related to helping people through local church ministry. And so I actually went to a Bible college in the Dallas metro area.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up there in 1996 and had a great experience, really did.
So what was it like when you got into a much more ethnically diverse world?
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it really I've always been the kind of person that really enjoyed having my horizons broadened a little bit and,
Yeah.
and experiencing new things, new cultures. I love to travel. I love to see the world. I love to try new foods and experience other people's point of view and that type of thing. And so I don't think it ever really presented any significant challenges for me. I
Yeah.
enjoyed that.
Yeah. What were you, and specifically, what were you going to study at the Bible college? I know that they have different courses.
They do, and that particular school had all sorts of different courses you could take, but I stuck with a church ministries background. That was what my degree was in, church ministries. I wanted to do, I wanted to be a pastor. I wanted to grow up and be a pastor.
Okay.
So
And have you ended up doing that?
I did do that. I did that for a number of years, until just about 5 years ago. I came to Hot Springs here, where there is a strong child welfare organization here that is church-led. It's a faith-based organization that does foster care and takes care of children that for whatever reason can't be in their home. We have a residential program there. And I came 5 years ago just to check it out, just to see how maybe I could help them raise money or how I could contribute in some way. And after visiting, I spent a couple of hours on the campus and met some of the kids. And just almost immediately, I knew that I was here for more than a fundraising mission, that maybe this is something that I was supposed to invest in. And so I was offered a position on the spot. I went home and resigned the church that I was pastoring and
Wow.
came here and started serving these kids.
That's a big move, and it's an honorable move. We've been talking a lot about mentorships and having mentors. Oddly enough, throughout different interviews, that specific item has come up on a number of occasions. Oddly, more specifically with guys than with girls. The necessity for a type of mentorship, especially of a masculine kind of
Yep.
persona and I think it's very important. I didn't have a real mentor myself until I was in my early 20s. An acting teacher became my mentor, a guy named Manu Tupo, who I have a massive amount of respect for. And he really brought me out of a real discombobulated state of confusion about myself. So when you were young, though, did you have a particular mentor that was in your family or outside of your family that
I did. I really did. In fact, I was blessed with a number of mentors. I can look back at a handful of people that just really poured in and invested into my life. Of course, I was also unusually blessed to be part of a family that stayed intact.
Yeah.
So I had a mom and a dad. My parents are still married today. They've been married 54 years, I think it
Wow.
is. And my grandparents were the same way, married 60 plus years before they passed.
Yeah.
And so I had those kind of family units that were together that were really pouring in and investing in my life, plus other mentors that spoke into my life. But I think really that's what you just talked about. I think that's really what drove me to make this career change, if you would. I don't really see it as a career change. I still see myself as a pastor
Yeah.
on assignment to care for children, but like a social worker that's an accidental social worker, but really a pastor at heart. I think what drove me to make that shift was that I began to see the real crisis in America. I think above everything else is the meltdown of the family.
Yes.
Is the dissolution of the family. There aren't any other issues that come close to the tentacles and the ripples and the long-reaching effects of the meltdown of the family in America.
Yeah.
It's staggering. In fact, I came here and shifted my whole focus and started studying that and did my master's degree, tailoring it to understanding the role of fatherlessness
Yeah.
in America, mentoring, as you talked about, and just the breakdown of the family in general. I don't think there's anything that has impacted our nation like that has, and it's a relatively new phenomenon.
Yes, it is. When I was looking at it, kind of from a cultural and social shift, like the perspective. It seemed to me I was having I can't remember which interview it was, but it was brought up about the '60s kind of sexual revolution and all of that, and this sort of splitting up of the of the sexes, into the sort of branded categories of their own, instead of championing the togetherness of the family unit. There started to be this sort of subtle move towards championing, the self
Right. Right.
over the opposite. So, without going off the rails too much, when you were young, growing up like that, what kind of line of business was your father in?
My father was he managed a cable television company back in the day, before satellite and dish and all that. I mean, you had to subscribe to cable TV, and they'd run a line to your house, and that's what he did. He managed that for our hometown.
Yeah, far out. That's cool. And did your mom work, or was she?
She did. Well, she stayed at home. I'm the youngest of three boys. She stayed at home until I went to school, and then she went back to work. She did a couple of different things, but for the longest time, she worked in the courthouse. She was a clerical support in our local county courthouse.
And having both of your parents together, and I'm assuming that their relationship was pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think every relationship requires effort and work and all that, and there's ugly parts and pretty parts and all that, but they just were very, very committed, and I think their faith played a huge part in that too. I mean, they had this faith system that just said you're together forever, and so yeah, I think they demonstrated a lot of good things and probably some not so good things along the way, that things that I wanted to emulate and things that I wanted to avoid, but all in all, I think their relationship was very strong.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you don't mind, what were some of the pitfalls that you saw as being smart to avoid? Right, it's important for people to. I mean, you don't have to go into great detail on it, but you can generalize it if you want. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I was raised with a father that had a pretty explosive temper.
Gotcha.
And I didn't want to emulate that at all. You get mad and say things you shouldn't say, and
I've been guilty of that myself, and I don't like it a bit.
Yeah. Well, and you can say things that can't be unsaid,
Exactly.
And that are never forgotten. And so I thought about that coming into my own and having my own family, that's something I didn't want to do. I'm kind of ashamed of this, but my father was pretty racist.
Yeah.
Growing up, and even as a young child, I saw that as a negative thing. I don't know where or how that value didn't get passed on to me, but I remember comments that he would say that I would just cringe as a kid, and I would think that doesn't sound right. And those are things that I didn't want to pick up, values that he tried to pass on, but I just didn't pick it up.
Well, thank goodness for that, because we need as little of that as humanly possible on this planet.
Absolutely.
And that being said, it's interesting because coming from a town like that and being able to come out of there with your head on straight, because I'm assuming that during that time period there might have been sort of a sentiment that was kind of generalized around the community that maybe that was kind of a way that people communicated with one another, that happens. It happens all over the world, actually. I've traveled to a number of other countries and was quite shocked at some of the ways in which there was communications about even people from our country or whatever country. So it's not we're not pigeonholed here in the U.S. when it comes to that. But how did you? What do you think it was that separated you from that? Because I can imagine going through all the way through school and all that. Like, what kind of friends did you collect around yourself? Did you have a different kind of crowd that you hung out with? Or?
Probably so. I think my story is really unique because I knew from a really young age what I wanted to do and be in life. I knew that faith was going to play a central role in my life. I knew that church ministry was going to play an important role somehow in my life, and so I don't have that story of living the wild life.
Right.
I just didn't. I never did. Even today, I still don't have. I mean, I've lived a pretty sheltered life. And so I surrounded myself with friends that were sort of like-minded. I mean, that's the people that I was attracted to and
Yeah.
that I attracted to myself. People that sort of had their heads screwed on straight and wanted to go in a positive direction with their life.
At what time, at what age, or was there a sort of a catalyst that set you off on a path of self-discovery and desire to be of service to others at a young age? Like, was there a specific moment that you can recall where you're like, aha?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because there is this interesting thing that happened when I was 6 years old that relates to this place where I now work and serve. The children's home, way back in the day, they used to travel around a 500-mile radius from here, and they would, I call it, sing for their supper. Like, the little kids would all dress up in their ties and shirts, and they would come church to church, because this children's home was supported by churches.
Uh-huh.
So they would come to the different churches that support them, and the kids would sing, and the administrator would share stories, and they'd take up a collection, and that's how they would kind of support the work there. Well, I vividly remember being 6 years old and these kids coming to my church, and I remember sitting next to my mother, and she leaned over and whispered, and she said, these boys and girls don't have moms and dads, and tried to explain what an orphan was to me in my 6-year-old understanding. And when she said that to me, I just remembered just this sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I started to cry. And I cried through the rest of that church service, and I told my mom, I said, can't we just take them all home and they can all live with us,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I remember standing out in the lobby of that church. The kids were selling different crafts and goods, and I wanted this little plastic coffee cup that had the name of the children's home on it. And the pastor of the church came by and saw that I wanted that, and he bought it for me and gave it to me. Well, I'd forgot I even had it. So 30 plus years later, I pull that thing out of my cabinet, and that's what reminded me of this place. And I felt this strong compulsion. I need to call them. I need to see, is that place still going? What's happening with them? And
Wow, what a full
and so
circle.
yeah, I picked up the phone and called them, and they said, yeah, we'd love to hear your story. We'd come tour the place, and that's kind of how I got reconnected. So for me, that full circle story of that event that happened at 6 years old kind of set me on this path to just wanting to serve people, and especially children, disenfranchised kids.
Yes, because as sensitive as a subject as that is, it's tough because there's the abuse of children and everything like that has occurred, with other organizations and everything. It's such a sensitive world to be in, and I myself have wanted to get involved in certain, youth groups and organizations, not having the time really, but then also being like, if I go and help out, what if somebody goes, oh, well, that guy, what's he doing around kids, and it's like, it's strange, because it's so important for people who actually care and who are trustworthy and to be able to be there for them, because without it, it's just a disaster. So I have a great, enormous amount of respect for the choice that you made in going in that direction, because we need more people like that.
Somebody's got to take
Somebody's
care
got
of
to
the
do
kids.
it.
They have to.
Yeah.
And that's what I say. Now my job is I work with churches to help recruit foster families. That's what
Yeah.
I do. And then once they step up, I help them prepare their home. I train them and all that to get ready for that. And that's part of my sales pitch, is when I get up, I'll say foster care and caring for these vulnerable kids is not for everybody, but it has to be for somebody. It
Yeah.
has to be. These kids are in the system and they got nowhere to go. That caseworker is making phone calls now saying, where can this kid go? And if there's nowhere for him to go, they sleep on the couch in a social worker's office. It's got to be for somebody.
Wow. Well, I mean, just on that subject, what has, without getting into the whole pandemic thing and all of that, but what has the lockdown and this kind of new sort of social distancing, what's happened with being able to put kids into foster care under these conditions?
Well, I think the biggest impact that COVID-19 has had on the child welfare system is the fact that kids are not in school, and that has several challenges, but one of the biggest challenges is many people might not realize this, but teachers are a lot of times the heroes in child welfare cases. They're the ones that see kids every day. And so they recognize if a kid is being abused. They see the signs, they see the bruises, they see the kid showing up in the same clothes every day, or they see the kid not showing up at all for weeks at a time. And so more often than not, it's a teacher that picks up the phone and calls the hotline.
Interesting.
And so with COVID-19, these kids are all home, some of them with their abusers.
Right.
And there's nobody there to lay eyes on it, and there's no hero as the teacher to come in and make that phone call. So we have great fear that when COVID-19 is over, there's going to be a lot of stories of abuse because these abusers have had no one to keep them in check.
Wow. That is a jarring thought. Because there was some news articles that were happening in the beginning of this whole lockdown, within the second month or so, as gig workers and different laborers were really starting to get laid off and lose their jobs and lose their there was just a huge rise in home emergency calls, for domestic abuse and things like that. Just, I mean, a gigantic escalation in it, and it is. I had been thinking, like, what is going on with the foster care system? How does that work? How would you be able to make all of these arrangements and keep everything going if there's these impediments put on it? But I mean, how are you guys trying to balance that? I mean, do you have the ability to go make home visits or anything like that, or is that up to the state?
Not really. I don't have. My part of it comes after. When the kid comes into foster care, they call me and ask for a foster home, and I try to connect them with one of our homes that we've got ready. But I also do have another program that we're involved in where we work with families who have been identified as at risk of losing their kids in foster care, and we come into their homes. We do home visiting, and we just mentor them and teach them parenting 101.
Almost like an intervention kind of thing in a way, but a more gentle version.
Yeah. So now that we continue to do, and COVID has made that very challenging because we want everybody to be safe and healthy, and we're going into their homes. We've done some by Zoom, but that population doesn't tend to have a lot of access to internet and smart devices and things like that. So it makes it challenging for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's it must be tough right now. Being someone who I can tell is very passionate about this. It's kind of like being a horse who's stuck at the starting gate, and all the other horses' gates are open, and it's like, hey, what about my gate too? But wow, that's a really tough situation to deal with. I'm almost stumped. What could be done? I mean, I don't know, unless they just change these rules and regulations around again, go back to something a little more normal. But I mean, what?
Well, I think friends and neighbors, family members are stepping up and really trying to check on one another. I think just in general, this pandemic has created so much stress on families, so much stress. I mean, even good, healthy families are struggling to stay together. You got families that have, I heard a husband say it this way to me a while back. He was talking about his marriage. He said, "I've got twice the wife and half the money. We're together all the time, and we can't go anywhere, and we lost our income, part of our income, and all those things are stressors, on marriages and families, and those are some serious challenges that people are having to really think through what to do."
Yes, I've been at the boot end of this whole thing myself.
Yeah.
And I definitely know that the pressures and stresses certainly haven't stopped.
Right.
Even on my end. Jumping back in time a little bit again, having had that that kind of awakening moment at such a young age, and then going through junior high, elementary, junior high, high school. What what specifically kept you on that path throughout all those years? Because that's a lot of years. A lot of times things like that in your younger years can kind of fade away and become milky and murky over time. And I mean, I'm very impressed with anybody who's able to maintain a consistency of character against the throes of social pressures.
Yeah.
They can come from environments and from
Sure.
peers, especially. So
I think that's a fair point. That's a fair point because I don't know anybody who is doing what they wanted to do when they were 7 years old. That's not lost on me. That's a blessing for me to be able to do that. And also, I heard a statistic recently that the question is not anymore what do you want to be when you grow up. It's what all do you want to be when you grow up, because the average person now in their career will change careers 8 different times.
Wow.
In their working span. They'll change 8 different times, will reinvent themselves in some other career. So that's very different than it was 50 years ago, where you grew up in the family business and you took it on and for the most part stuck with it. So I don't know what the answer to that is, other than I just have such a clear sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been that way. I've always had a clear sense of purpose, feeling like that I had a unique, I'm going to use the word calling. I feel like that I have a calling on my life to help people in some way or another. And I don't really see what I'm doing now as a departure from church ministry or pastoral ministry. I just see it as an expansion of that. That, you know, my congregation is just much younger.
Certainly, and you know, having had a much more open mind than many of or some of the people that you grew up around in that community.
Right.
Did seeing and hearing and being around that kind of a negative attitude towards other people, other human beings, did that inspire you even more?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had that's another thing that I was blessed with, and I guess it just came from my creator. Well, my mother, she was also this way. Just a high sense of justice, that wrong is wrong, and doing people wrong is wrong, and it should not be tolerated. And so that, I got a lot of stories about that growing up. Just, you know, somebody being bullied or picked on or whatever would just cause this sense of justice to rise up in me that shouldn't be. And or you know, somebody that's disenfranchised. Or I remember as a kid, if I was in a restaurant and saw an old man eating alone, that bothered me. You know, somebody needs to go talk to him. Somebody needs to spend time with him. And so that was something that I know that came from my mother. I know that, you know, my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like that was a gift from God too. That sense of justice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you ever get yourself into a pickle sticking up for the little guy in any situations?
Oh yeah. I've had instances. I mean, I've been fired from a job for that kind of thing. You know, insisting that I stand up for somebody, and the powers that be didn't think we should. And yeah, from time to time I would get myself into a pickle, but I always put my head on the pillow, feeling good about being on the right side of that.
And that's one thing I totally agree about, is that, you know, I've been in similar situations myself where, you know, keeping my mouth shut, you know, may have been warranted for social niceties, but at the end of the day, you know, being able to lay down on my pillow at night and go, you know what, it was probably an ugly situation, but if I didn't say something, no one would have, and nothing would have been said. And
yeah.
You know,
well, it's kind of like it's exactly what you talked about earlier with kids, you know, wanting to get involved, but you're afraid, you know, how am I going to be cast, or how could this go south? It's weighing all the risks and saying that person's worth it. You know, we got to go all in to help that person or those children or whatever.
Yeah, and that being said, have you over these many years in the ministry and then working with kids and all that, have you started thinking of, you know, outside the box on new ways, new programs, new ideas of how this could maybe be addressed on a larger scale or more efficiently?
Well, I think the biggest new idea is not really a new idea. I think it has to do with engaging and motivating churches to get involved and do what we have relegated to the state to do.
Exactly.
We've asked the state to do all of this, and in my opinion, we've sort of outsourced our faith to paid professionals. Over the years we've said we should have. I know this is going to sound radical, but I'm not sure that nursing homes were ever God's idea. I'm not sure that children's homes were ever God's idea. You know, but that's sort of the direction we've gone over the last 50 years. Is we create these facilities and we throw money at it and say, take care of our problem. But that problem you're talking about is mom or dad or grandpa or this child that doesn't have a home. And I'm not so sure that we shouldn't rethink that whole model and say it's not about sending them to a facility and throwing money at the problem or taxes at the problem, but instead opening your home. I mean, that's the scripture that I read. The Bible that I read talks about, you know, the caring for the quartet of the vulnerable. That's what we call them in our organization. The quartet of the vulnerable is the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner.
Yeah.
Those are the four that scripture is very clear about protecting. That's the protected class.
It's interesting that you say that because you know, there in my community there's some churches that have kind of broken the mold a little bit in relationship to their property where the actual building location is, and have opened up kind of programs that happen all throughout the week, and there's sort of like it's not a college atmosphere or anything like that. I'm sorry, we're just in the middle of something right now. If you can give us a moment, we're just doing a quick interview. Thank you so much though, but if you come back later, we'll be here. You know, that these places should be open all the time, 7 days a week. There should be always some place you can go, because I've driven by so many. Where I live in Spring, Texas, there's a church every other block almost, you know. Yeah. And I drive by them so many times all throughout the week, and the gates are locked, the doors are shut, the parking lot is empty except for Sunday, or maybe Saturday if they do Saturday and Sunday services.
What a waste of resources.
I keep driving by, and I'm driving by all the time going, why aren't these doors open, you know, all day, at least all day, all evening, for those people who just need a place to stop in, maybe pray, maybe get some assistance, maybe get a free meal, you know, or something. And because when you mentioned that, you know, that we've turned over so much of our power to the state and expecting them to solve our problems. And you know, down the street from well, at my son's high school, they've been doing the food bank there. It's every Sunday, and since they started it, the line has just gotten longer and longer and longer and longer. And at the same time, I'm driving by all these other churches around the area. None of them have a food bank. None of them are handing out food. None of them have a line of. I'm going, why is there not like a whole movement here to get all of these people fed? There's kitchens in almost every single one of these churches. They have a kitchen, they have a small cafeteria, they have a lot of these things, and they're not utilized. And it does, you know, push my buttons a little bit. That's all.
I think it should. I think churches are sitting on a lot of resources. If you look at those churches you're talking about on every corner, they tend to be on the prime property in the community. They sit on the highways and on the bypasses, and you know, high visibility and easy access. That's what you want when you're building a church, is you put it in the best possible place, and then you build it with all these amenities and facilities to feed people, and you know, to feed. But the problem is you're feeding your own people. You're feeding the people that are already coming to the church, and you're not thinking about those that are needy in the community.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a tragedy. I think one of the things that COVID has impacted every single part of our lives, every aspect, without exception.
Yeah,
but I think when it comes to the church, the biggest impact that it's had is you know, churches have had to go to a different model. They're just like we're working from home. Churches are having to go to an online platform, and they're having to talk about, you know, what's happening besides inside this building, what's happening in your home, and what's happening with your family, and I think it's causing people. I've seen an increase in families wanting to get involved in foster care during COVID.
Oh, really? Well, that's a good. That's
because you're having to find different ways to express your spirituality. You can't just come together on a Sunday morning and sing your songs and hear the preacher preach a sermon and go home and say, "I'm spiritual." you're not able to come to church, you're not able to come together, and so people have more time, and they're asking each other, how else can I express my spirituality other than just come to a service?
Oh, absolutely. And I have uh, a significant concern about the bounce back of many congregations, and if there's going to even be an ability to have a comeback. I can imagine that donations, for some churches have probably increased over this time period, but for other more localized churches that really count on those Sunday services and stuff, and like you said, there's a whole swath of people out there who are not technically inclined, especially a slightly older generation. My mom, for instance, I mean, she can't even figure out how to send a picture via text at this point. You know what I mean? It's just so to ask her to figure out Zoom chat and this and log on and do all of the other things. It's like we just want to go down the street and go to where we used to go and sit in the benches we used to sit on and hear the word that we used to hear.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that for some people it's probably been rather devastating not having that social, that Sunday social visit with people too, because like you said, a lot of times people aren't going to check on people at their houses.
Yeah, that's true.
What has this complex situation that we're in, has it given you a kind of a renewed vigor to fight through all of this and see something positive come out on the end? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much shifting. There's so much shifting in every part of our lives that it's hard not to be at least a little bit excited about where this is all going and what is the new normal going to look like when we come out of this on the other side. In every domain of our lives, there are parts that will never be the same. And I think it's interesting that we have a chance to figure out what kind of new normal we want to come back to.
Yeah, and it's tough because there's so many mixed messages out there, and without going too deep down the rabbit hole, it's like, you have one expert saying one thing, another expert saying the exact opposite. This virologist saying one thing, this virologist saying the exact opposite. This leader in the health community saying one thing, this leader in the health community saying the exact opposite, and it's just this massive clashing. Without any real, to me, without any real fundamental, groundedness in any of it. Because like I said, it depends on what channel you watch, what story you're going to get.
Right.
It depends on what newspaper you open or what science journal you open.
Yeah.
And who owns it or what. So it's a very perplexing and confusing time to even get into debates about the subject.
It really is.
But what I am concerned about is that with this discombobulation that's happening, I've had to extricate myself from it to a greater degree, because I myself, I've never lived as a fear-based person, and and I would have been the type, in a leper colony to walk around and not worry about it. You know what I mean? That's just like my personality, and some people will, point fingers at me, go, "You're being a danger to other people," and I'm like, how? I don't, and this, that, the other. So I'm, it's gotten so perplexing to me that I just almost don't even want to talk about it anymore.
But it is a very divisive issue.
It's very, and so, I'm wondering, what's going to be the outcome when we do find a new normal, because nobody's agreeing on anything at this point. So what is the new normal going to be? Is it going to be one of just absolute and utter disagreement, masks versus no masks, vaxxers versus anti-vaxxers, and just a big, should we start football teams? You know what I mean? It's like, I think that would be a better idea. But how have you seen it? How have you seen in the spiritual community that you're a part of? I like to use the word spiritual because religious has a weird context to some people, but in that spiritual community that you're a part of, what have you seen, since we're on the subject, what kind of effect have you seen, generally speaking, on people, throughout this time period, positive or negative?
One of the things that I think is really dangerous and damaging is there's a lot of mistrust And I think the thing you just spoke to about the vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and the different news channels that spin it a different way, it seems like with all of those different mixed messages, you see a lot of mistrust. And I think one of the unhealthy things I'm seeing in the spiritual community is people that are just digging their heels in and saying, you know, the whole thing is just a government sham to take over the world and take all of our freedoms or whatever. I think that's a pretty unhealthy thing. But the positive things that I'm seeing coming out of this are people are being forced to kind of reevaluate how important community is, and how important relationships are, and how important deep relationships are, especially in the faith community. I think for the last 25 years we've been on this trajectory towards what I call the attractional model in church, where it's a big show. We want everybody come in, sit on rows facing forward. We're going to blow you away with the talent of our music team and the charisma of our speaker, and everybody leaves and they mark that off as spirituality. But spirituality really is marked in community. It's about relationship. It's about growing together and spurring one another on, the Bible says, towards love and good deeds. And so I think now, without having the ability to go headlong into the attractional model, this model we've been building and growing for 25 plus years, now we're having to think about not how do we get bigger as a church,
Right.
How do we get smaller? How do we do small? We've done big well for years. How do we do small really well now? How do we figure out how to just grow together in our friendship and spur each other on?
That's that's a really important factor as well that you bring up, is this this pressure that's now been kind of placed on everybody has forced us to reevaluate all of our relationships. I mean, it's completely turned my life upside down, in very short order.
Yeah.
And how have you seen the impact between social classes? Has this, have you noticed with the groups that you work with, have the lower economic strata been impacted far greater by this whole thing, or that you've noticed? I don't know.
Here's what's really interesting: the government program that has impacted the lower economic strata the most is the enhanced unemployment, where everybody gets their unemployment. If they get laid off due to COVID, they get their regular unemployment, plus they get another $600 a week.
Right.
Well, it depends on where you're at in the socioeconomic world, how much money $600 a week is. For your poor class, $600 a week that's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
In addition to whatever else that they're going to get, for unemployment. And so I'm seeing poor people that are living like kings compared to how they used to live.
Right.
In fact, it's creating a little bit of a problem because they don't want to go back to work now.
Sure.
Now that their employers are opening back up. And, I know construction crews that are having a really hard time getting general laborers to come back to work. I know restaurant owners I know a restaurant owner right now that can't reopen because he can't find laborers. His servers and everybody that he had before are making more money sitting at home, and he's not able to reopen.
Well, when I think about that, obviously the biggest danger I see is when that lifeline is pulled, which eventually it will be. It can't be something that's just out there forever. It's unaffordable economically. So at some point, that's going to stop. The buck is going to stop, and now you're going to have a whole bunch of individuals who have been living off of this, in this way, suddenly go, oh God, now I have to get a job. It's going to be a whole panic, I mean, that's just the way I see it, unless they somehow keep this going forever, which I think would also be negative in the long run. But
you sure don't want to disincentivize people from working.
I don't think so, because work gives me a sense of meaning, of giving life
Absolutely.
meaning, and
I think that's the way we're all wired, the way we're all created.
Yeah.
We want to feel like at the end of the day, I moved the needle on something. I made a difference.
Have you ever seen a transition? Have you ever been involved with ministering someone who's of working age, who's been down into a complete, either a black hole of addiction or just bad luck or whatever, who's given up on life, and then seen them come back full circle and become a normal working citizen doing their part? If you do have
Oh, sure, yeah. I've seen several people that have come from, the lowest to doing well, and I think the big difference for any of us to make a comeback is hope.
Right.
I think hope is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. If you get up in the morning and you believe that today can be better than yesterday, sky's the limit for that person. But the opposite is also true. If you get up in the morning and believe that there is no hope, that this is as good as it's going to get, then that's a really dangerous place to be.
I completely agree. The sense of hopelessness that can come in times of stress. Wow. I mean, I can tell you it is tough. I know that a lot of people out there right now have been feeling that the crunch from all of this. That being said, what kind of advice could you give us to help us through the potential hopelessness that some of us might be feeling right now?
That's a great question. Resiliency, I use the word resiliency because to me that's closely tied to hope. One of the things that we teach kids is you can't really do anything about the trauma and the abuse that you've had in the past other than work through it, get counseling, pray through it, medication if you have to, whatever. But what we want to teach kids, and what I think everybody needs to learn, is this concept of resiliency. How do I bounce back? There's going to be other difficult things that I face in the future. How do I bounce back? How do I come back from it? And to me, it has to do with number one, you got to have an anchor somewhere that's bigger than you. Like to me, my faith is so important to me because I really believe that there's a God and He's good, and in the end, it's all going to work out. Maybe not how I want it to, but it's going to work out really well if I just kind of get on board with His plan. So that worldview is important. Number two, there's a lot we can't control. And so get up in the morning and figure out what things are in my control today. It may not be much. Maybe just that I can make my bed. Maybe that's the only thing I can control today. But there's something that I can control that I can put my fingers on and move the needle on. And number three, figure out what you're good at and exploit it. Lean into it. What brings you happiness? What brings you a sense of fulfillment and joy? I think that may be kind of what you're doing, traveling around and interviewing people and trying to, share some positive stories and things like that. Find something that you're good at, that the world needs, and just lean into that. Whether it's, an artistic ability, or whether it's an ability to communicate, or whether it's an ability to make people laugh, or whatever. Just find something you're good at and lean into that, and that's resiliency.
You know what? I mean, now that you mention that, it strikes me that since you do have a whole group of people right now who essentially aren't working, making potentially making more money than they were making before, or maybe the same, or whatever the case may be, but have nothing but time on their hands. Wouldn't now be the best time ever to volunteer all of that excess time to the local community and to those in need? I mean,
without a doubt, volunteering would be a great option right now during this pandemic.
That and just to give people some ideas who've never done any kind of volunteering or anything like that, what would be some of the possible avenues of volunteerism, if I can use that? What would be some of the avenues that they could take in terms of, like, what could they Google? What could they, go around their neighborhood, community, and try and look for? Are there names of groups that you know of that are nationwide, or is there specific terms you can search? Or
always, you want to look for anything working with anything working with vulnerable populations. Homeless shelter. We got a homeless shelter right here in this community that they're always looking for people to help. There are a lot of food banks going on right now. The
Yes.
government has a couple of different food programs that are happening. They're distributing food. You see them everywhere, and probably the one you were talking about at
Yeah.
the high school there. So find a food bank somewhere that you can volunteer to help sort that stuff. All the main ones, the Goodwill and the Salvation Army, they can always use volunteers. And of course, every church in America, if it's worth their salt, if you call them and say, I want to volunteer, they should be able to tell you a list of things opportunities at the church that you could do.
Yeah.
So, should be plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, I would hope so. And again, with some of the strict, tight sort of regulations that are on everything, it's the fear factor of volunteering, or possibly even being able to use it as an excuse to not volunteer. It's a great excuse to be lazy.
You can also volunteer to mow your neighbor's lawn.
That I have my house where I live in Spring, Texas. A little old lady lived next door to me, and her front lawn connects to my front lawn. And anytime I was ever mowing my lawn, I just went right over and did hers and came back, and it was never even an issue, never even a thought. Dug out her ditches to keep them flowing so the water didn't back up into her front yard. It took me almost 2 weeks, But it's those kind of things. It was never. She barely ever came out of her house, so I would hardly ever even see her. But
Yeah.
she would have family come and visit her every now and then, and when I would see her, she was happy to see me, which felt good, which felt really good. And
That's great.
That kind of sense of community, I think, is very important. Maybe even walk around the neighborhood, knock on some doors, and see how people are.
Sure.
See if anybody needs any help right in your local.
Sure.
On your block.
Yeah, might want to put a mask on if you're going to do that.
Of course, put a mask on, certainly.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well,
for people who maybe are shaken with their faith right now, I think this is a good maybe wrap up question. We'll see, but people who are shaken right now, that their faith is shaken, their belief is shaken, their hope is shaken, and I know that there's probably a lot of people out there right now who are hanging on by their fingertips. What might you be able to share with us that could help us hang on tight?
I think a little historical perspective goes a long way. What I would want to say to somebody in that situation is in the end it will work out. If you look back, we all have, you do, I do, we have a pretty good track record of surviving difficulties in our lives. We may not have come through it unscathed,
Yeah.
but we came through it. And at some point along the way, we've all cried out to God for help, and things may not have gone exactly like we wanted them to go, but you look in the mirror every morning and you can fog that mirror. You're still alive, you're still breathing, there's still hope that tomorrow can be a better day than today. I would say we don't get lost in this moment. Like, I know a lot of people are struggling. I know there are a lot of things that are upside down in our world, and that's very disconcerting, that's challenging, but take the long view on life. Take the long view. It's not over until it's over. And for me, I have this strong sense of faith that God is not controlling every single detail of everything that happens. We all have our free will.
Yes.
That's how my faith system says it. We've got a free will. I can do whatever I want. You can do whatever you want. And so I don't control everything. But I do believe there's a God that is controlling the times and the seasons, and that He says He'll never cause us to be tempted or challenged in a way where He doesn't provide a way of escape. And so my way of escape is just to control what I can control, influence what I can influence, and then trust the rest to God and focus on those things that I can control.
That's very powerful, and I hope everybody got a lot from that, because what he just said for me, is not a a religious type of tenet, regurgitating tenets. This is something that is universal, that having faith, whatever your belief is, and having hope, and doing what you can do daily, but attaching yourself to something bigger, more powerful, and greater, whatever that is in your understanding, is definitely a tether that we can hang on to in dark times.
There was a huge study that was done a few years ago that showed that people of faith tend to recover faster from physical illnesses. And of course, my tribe, the faith people, would say, well, that's because God healed them. And I believe that he does heal.
Sure.
But the theory that the scientists that did this study, that their theory is it's the power of hope. That's what brings healing so much faster when we go through things physically or emotionally or financially or whatever. That power of hope. If you'll notice, people around you that have hope tend to bounce back faster. They tend to do better. And so not letting go of that hope, and that my faith system gives me a lot of hope.
It so does, and there we go. So hope, faith, and charity,
Yeah.
and volunteerism. Let's, I think that if we can all go one step beyond what we're used to doing, and reach our hand out in whatever way we can to help make somebody else's life a little bit better, then I think that we'll all get somewhere, get to a unification faster than we're going at this point in time.
I think so.
Man, I really appreciate you taking your time out and coming here and being so honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I am quite certain that those who are following the Love America tour will get a lot out of this one.
Love America.
And let's get out of here before it starts pouring down rain.